For 8 long years, he was a ghost. A phantom from a life she barely recognized. To the world, David Brown was a titan of industry, a billionaire CEO whose name was whispered with awe in boardrooms from New York to Shanghai. But to Avery Hayes, he was the man who had vanished without a trace, leaving her pregnant and alone. She had built a life from the ashes of his memory, raising their son with fierce love and quiet resilience. But when her son's life hung in the balance, she was forced to dial a number she had sworn she would never touch. And when the ghost on the other end finally answered, the all-powerful CEO trembled. The scent of yeast and melting butter was Avery Hayes's sanctuary. It clung to her clothes, her hair, and the very walls of her small bakery, the Rolling Pin. It was the smell of survival, of independence, of a life built with her own 2 hands. For 8 years, this scent had been the constant companion to the one that truly defined her existence, the sweet, boyish smell of her son Leo. Leo was her world. A bright, boisterous 8-year-old with a mop of unruly chestnut hair and eyes the exact shade of whiskey, a shade she saw every morning in her own reflection, and a shade she remembered with a painful lurch from a lifetime ago. He was the reason she woke at 4 a.m. to knead dough, and the reason she collapsed into bed long after the sun had set. Their life in the quiet town of Havenwood, New York, was simple, predictable, and hers. It was a fragile snow globe of peace she had carefully constructed, and today a careless hand had shaken it to its core. The fluorescent lights of the county hospital's pediatric wing flickered overhead, a stark, sterile contrast to the warm glow of her bakery. The doctor's words echoed in the unnerving silence of her mind, a cruel litany of medical terms that all translated to the same terrifying thing: her son was sick. Dangerously sick. Aplastic anemia. Dr. Matthews had said, his face a mask of professional sympathy. His bone marrow isn't producing enough new blood cells. The treatments are intensive. And the best prognosis, the highest chance of a full recovery, comes from a bone marrow transplant. Siblings are the best match, but as an only child, the next best option is a biological parent. A biological parent. The phrase hit Avery with the force of a physical blow. She was his biological parent, but they needed the other one. That night, with Leo asleep in his bed, his breathing a little too shallow for her comfort, Avery climbed the creaky stairs to her attic. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, illuminating forgotten relics of a life before Havenwood. In the corner beneath a stack of old photo albums she never opened was a small lacquered box. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single elegant business card. The paper was thick, creamy, with embossed lettering that was still crisp after all these years. David Brown. Brown Global Holdings. And beneath it, a phone number. Not the main line listed on their website she had checked once years ago in a moment of weakness, but a direct private line. The number he had given her on a moonlit night in Central Park, whispering, "Call this number anytime for any reason. It will always reach me." She had believed him then. She was 22, a scholarship art student with paint on her jeans and dreams in her eyes. He was 25, charming, intense, and though she didn't know the extent of it then, impossibly wealthy. Their love had been a whirlwind, a fierce, all-consuming fire that burned for 6 brilliant months. He'd spoken of a future, of a life together, of a family. And then he was gone. No call, no letter, no explanation. He just vanished. 2 weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. Pride, hot and sharp, had warred with her heartbreak. She wouldn't chase a man who had so easily discarded her. She moved away from the city, changed her name from her maiden name Ross to her mother's Hayes, and built a fortress around her heart and her son. For 8 years, that number had been a symbol of her greatest love and her deepest betrayal. Now, it was her only hope. Sitting at her worn kitchen table, the lacquered box open before her, Avery stared at the phone. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and fury. What would she even say? "Hi, David. It's Avery. Remember me?" The woman you abandoned. Well, it turns out we have a son and he's dying. Could you possibly spare a moment from your billion-dollar empire to see if you're a genetic match?" The bitterness tasted like acid in her throat. She picked up the phone, her finger hovering over the keypad. She thought of Leo's pale face, his uncharacteristic lethargy. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold, desperate resolve. For Leo, she would swallow her pride. For Leo, she would face the ghost. She took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed. The phone rang once, twice. She was about to hang up, her nerve failing, when the line clicked. There was no secretary, no automated system. Just the sound of quiet, ambient space. Then a voice. Deeper than she remembered, honed by years of command, but unmistakably his. "This is Brown." The sound of it, the simple clipped arrogance, sent a tremor through her. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her throat closed up, choked with a torrent of unspoken words from the past 8 years. "Hello?" he said again, a flicker of impatience in his tone. "Who is this?" Avery closed her eyes, picturing Leo's sleeping face. "David," she whispered, her voice cracking on his name. Silence. On the other end of the line, across the miles and the years, the silence was absolute. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. She could hear his breathing, a sudden sharp intake of air followed by a shaky exhale. The sound was so profound, so utterly stripped of the confidence he had just displayed, that it was more shocking than any words could be. Finally, he spoke her name. It was not a question, but a ragged, disbelieving statement. "Avery." And in that one word, Avery Hayes heard it all. The shock, the recognition, and something else, something she couldn't have anticipated. Fear. The all-powerful CEO, the man who held the world in his palm, was trembling. The view from the 95th floor of Brown Tower was a god's-eye panorama of Manhattan. The city sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of light and ambition, all of it feeling in some small way like it belonged to David Brown. His office was a testament to minimalist power, a vast desk of polished obsidian walls of glass, a single imposing abstract painting. Everything was controlled, curated, and cold, just like his life. At 33, David was the undisputed king of his domain. He had taken the reins of Brown Global Holdings from his formidable father Alastair 5 years ago and had since tripled its value. He was ruthless in the boardroom, precise in his decision-making, and emotionally detached in his personal life. He was engaged to Genevieve Beaumont, the daughter of a French banking magnate, in a union that was more of a merger than a romance. It was a life of impeccable order. Until the phone rang. His private line, the one only a handful of people had rang so infrequently that the sound was a jolt to his system. He'd answered with his customary brusqueness. "This is Brown." And then he heard her voice, a whisper from a grave he had been forced to dig 8 years ago. "David." The world tilted on its axis. The glittering city outside his window blurred into a meaningless smear of light. His blood ran cold, then hot. Every defense he had meticulously constructed over the years crumbled to dust. He could feel a tremor start in his hand, the one holding his multi-$1,000 smartphone, and he gripped it tighter to still the shaking. Avery. He hadn't said her name aloud in 8 years. He hadn't dared to even think it too loudly in the confines of his own mind. She was a memory locked in a vault, a story with a brutal final chapter he had been forced to accept. He remembered their last day together, a perfect autumn afternoon in Brooklyn. They had shared a pizza on a park bench, her laughter echoing in the crisp air. She'd been wearing his oversized university sweater, her fiery red hair a stark contrast to the faded gray fabric. He had loved her with a ferocity that scared him. He had been on the verge of telling her everything about his family, the name, the money he had so carefully concealed while pretending to be a simple postgraduate student. He was going to ask her to marry him that very night. He went home to his apartment to retrieve the ring, a simple sapphire that matched her eyes. And he found his father waiting for him. Alastair Brown was a man carved from granite and ice. His disapproval was a physical force. He had discovered David's proletarian affair. The words he used were like razors. Gold digger. Insignificant. A stain on our legacy. David had fought back for the first time in his life. He had screamed, yelled, defended Avery's honor. Then Alistair played his trump card, a file placed coldly on the coffee table. It was filled with photos of Avery. Avery walking to class. Avery at her part-time waitressing job. Avery laughing with friends. It was surveillance. A clear, unspoken threat. This girl, Alistair had said, his voice dangerously soft, is a distraction you cannot afford, and distractions can be removed permanently. The world is a dangerous place for a girl with no connections. Accidents happen. And then the final soul-crushing blow. Alistair claimed he'd already acted. He told David he had sent his fixer, a man named Peterson, to see her. She has been compensated for her time. Alistair had stated, his eyes devoid of emotion. A check with enough zeros to ensure she disappears quietly. She took it without hesitation, son. I told you what she was. She's already gone. Devastated, broken, and fearing for her safety, even if his father was lying, David had collapsed. He tried to call her, but her number was disconnected. He went to her apartment, but it was empty. The landlord said she'd packed and left without a forwarding address. It confirmed his father's story. The love of his life had sold their future for a payoff. The pain of that betrayal had hollowed him out, leaving behind the cold, ambitious shell of a man who now sat in a penthouse office. David, are you there? Her voice, fragile and real, pulled him from the vortex of the past. He cleared his throat, struggling to regain control. Avery, where are you? I'm in a town. Upstate. Havenwood, she said. Listen, I wouldn't be calling. I swear I wouldn't. But I have no choice. He heard the desperation in her voice, a sound he had never associated with the proud, vibrant woman he remembered. What is it? Are you in trouble? There was a pause, and then the words that rearranged his universe. It's my son. Our son. His name is Leo. He's 8 years old. The obsidian desk seemed to fall away beneath him. He stood up, his legs unsteady. Our son. 8 years old. The math was simple, brutal, and perfect. She had been pregnant when she left. She hadn't taken a payoff and run. She had been carrying his child. His father hadn't just lied. He had stolen a life from him. He had stolen his son. The rage that filled him was a white-hot inferno, eclipsing the cold grief he had nursed for years. He's sick, David, Avery was saying, her voice thick with unshed tears. He needs a bone marrow transplant. The doctors said, a biological parent is the best hope. The world snapped back into sharp, horrifying focus. His rage was instantly banked by a primal fear. His son, a son he never knew he had, and he was sick. I'll be there. He said the words coming out with a force that surprised him. There was no hesitation, no consideration for his schedule, his fiancée, his father. Nothing else mattered. Tell me where. I'm coming now. He scribbled the address on a notepad, his hand still shaking. After he hung up, he stood motionless for a full minute, the silence of the office pressing in on him. The entire edifice of his life, built on a foundation of lies, had just been leveled by a single phone call. He buzzed his assistant. Cancel everything for the rest of the week, he commanded, his voice raw. Have my jet ready for departure to Stewart International Airport in 1 hour, and get Garrett Vance in here, now. Garrett, his head of security and the closest thing he had to a friend, arrived moments later. He was a stoic ex-Special Forces soldier who had seen David at his worst. Trouble, boss? Garrett asked, taking in David's disheveled state. The worst? David breathed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time in years. My father told me she was gone. He said she took the money and ran. He looked at Garrett, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He lied, Garrett, all of it. It was all a lie. Before Garrett could respond, David was already striding out of the office, shrugging off his suit jacket as if it were a straitjacket. He was leaving behind the penthouse the power, the lie he had been living. He was going to Havenwood. He was going to find the woman he had never stopped loving, and he was going to meet the son his father had stolen from him. The ghost was about to become flesh and blood, and hell was coming with him. Havenwood was the antithesis of David's world. There were no skyscrapers piercing the clouds, only the gnarled branches of ancient oak trees. The air didn't smell of exhaust fumes and ambition, but of damp earth wood smoke, and as he stepped out of the black town car he'd hired, the faint sweet scent of baking bread. He had traded his bespoke suit for dark jeans and a simple black cashmere sweater, but he still felt glaringly out of place. The car itself, a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class, looked like an alien spacecraft on the quiet tree-lined street. He saw curtains twitching in the windows of neighboring houses. He stood for a moment before the address Avery had given him. It was a charming, slightly worn-down Victorian house with a storefront on the ground floor. A whimsical hand-painted sign read "The Rolling Pin," her bakery. The reality of it, the sheer domestic normalcy, was more dizzying than any corporate takeover. Taking a breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of his heart, he walked to the residential door at the side of the building and knocked. The seconds that passed before the door opened felt like an eternity. When it did, she was standing there. Avery. 8 years had changed her, yet she was achingly the same. The fiery red hair was a little tamer, pulled back in a loose ponytail. There were faint lines around her whiskey-colored eyes, testament to sleepless nights and worries he couldn't imagine. She was thinner than he remembered, and the vibrant, carefree energy of her youth had been replaced by a quiet, formidable strength. She was more beautiful than ever. "David," she said, her voice flat, guarded. "Avery." He replied, his own voice hoarse. He wanted to reach out to touch her, to bridge the impossible chasm of 8 years that separated them, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It was a mixture of old pain, fresh anger, and weary resolve. She stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in." He entered a home that was the complete opposite of his sterile penthouse. It was warm, cluttered, and lived in. A stack of children's books sat on a coffee table, a half-finished drawing of a superhero was taped to the refrigerator, and a pair of small, muddy sneakers were kicked off by the door. The evidence of a life he had no part in was everywhere. It was a gut punch. "He's at my friend Bianca's house," she said, answering the question in his eyes. "I didn't want to. I thought it was best we talk first." "Talk?" David repeated the word, tasting like ash. "Avery, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know about him." Her laugh was a short, bitter sound. "You didn't know. You disappeared, David. You vanished off the face of the earth. No call, no note. You just left me. What was I supposed to think?" "My father," he began the words, feeling feeble even to him. "He told me you left. He said he offered you money and you took it. He showed me. He made it look like you had just gone. I tried to find you. Your number was disconnected, your apartment empty." Avery stared at him, her expression shifting from anger to stunned confusion. "Money. Someone offered me money." "David, that's insane. No one ever approached me. I left because I thought you had abandoned me. I was heartbroken. I couldn't stay in the city surrounded by memories of you." They stood there in the warm, cozy living room, two people staring at the wreckage of a past built on a sophisticated, cruel deception. The lies that had kept them apart were now laid bare, and the truth was somehow more painful. All that lost time, all those years, wasted. "My father," David said again, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He did this. He orchestrated all of it." The scope of his father's betrayal was still expanding, a black hole threatening to consume him. Before Avery could process this, the front door burst open and a small boy ran in, followed by a woman with a kind face. "Mom, Bianca says I beat her at checkers 6 times in a row." The boy stopped short when he saw David. He looked from the tall, imposing stranger to his mother, his whiskey-colored eyes, their eyes wide with curiosity. David's breath caught in his throat. It was like looking at a photograph of himself as a child, but with Avery's fiery spirit shining through. This was Leo, his son. Avery quickly knelt, putting a protective arm around her son. "Leo, honey, this is a friend of mine. His name is David." Leo looked him up and down. "Are you a giant?" he asked with the unfiltered honesty of a child. A faint, wobbly smile touched David's lips. "Sometimes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Leo, why don't you go wash up for dinner?" Avery said gently, guiding him towards the kitchen. She looked back at David, her eyes conveying a million complicated emotions. Later, after Leo was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had made the life-altering call just the night before. The air was thick with unspoken grief for what they had lost. "He needs the test, David," Avery said, her voice tired. "That's why you're here. We can sort through this mess later. Right now, all that matters is Leo." "I know," David said. "I've already made the arrangements. A medical team from Mount Sinai is on standby. They can come here or we can take him to the city. Whatever is best for him. I'll cover everything, Avery. Every cost." She flinched at the mention of money. "I don't want your money, David." "It's not about what you want," he replied, his tone softer than he intended. "It's about our son. Let me do this. Please. After everything, it's the least I can do." She finally nodded, the fight seeming to drain out of her. He saw then the crushing weight she had been carrying alone for so long. He had come here to save the son he never knew he had. But looking at the exhausted, resilient woman across from him, he realized he had to save her too. And in doing so, maybe, just maybe, he could save himself. But as he made the call to mobilize his medical team, he knew this was only the beginning. His father, Alistair, would not remain in the dark for long. The shadow of the patriarch was long, and it was about to fall over the fragile peace of Havenwood. News traveled fast in the circles Alistair Brown inhabited. It moved through whispers in exclusive clubs, coded messages between assistants, and the invisible network of favors and surveillance he had cultivated over a lifetime. David's unscheduled flight to a provincial airport, the cancellation of a week's worth of high-stakes meetings, and the mobilization of a top-tier medical team from a hospital he personally endowed. It all painted a picture Alistair did not like. He sat in his study, a room paneled in dark mahogany that smelled of old leather and power. A crystal glass of scotch sat untouched on his desk. He hadn't needed his sources to confirm his suspicions. He knew where David had gone. He knew why. The re-emergence of Avery Hayes after 8 years was not a coincidence. She was a loose end he had thought permanently tied off. His original plan had been brutally efficient. He had never actually sent a fixer to offer Avery money. That was a lie, crafted specifically for David, designed to poison his memory of the girl and turn his heartbreak into cynical resolve. The real plan had been simpler and more insidious. He'd had Avery's phone disconnected and paid her landlord a hefty sum to lie, telling David she had left willingly. He had then created a credible report of her death in a small-town car accident a year later, a fiction supported by a doctored newspaper clipping and a falsified police report from a corrupt local sheriff in his debt. He had presented this proof to David, cementing the finality of his loss and ensuring he would never look for her again. Now the ghost was back, and she had brought with her an heir he had never known existed. An heir with impure blood, a commoner's legacy. A threat to the Brown line. Alistair picked up the phone. On the other end was Peterson, the same man whose name he had used to deceive his son. Peterson was not just a fixer. He was Alistair's shadow, a man who handled the things that couldn't be touched by corporate lawyers. "He's in a town called Havenwood," Alistair said, his voice as cold as the winter wind. "With the woman, Avery Hayes." "And the boy, sir," Peterson confirmed. "Leo Hayes, age 8. The confirmation sent a jolt of fury through Alistair. The situation needs to be contained. David is acting on emotion, a liability we cannot afford. I need to know what her angle is. From what we've gathered, the boy is sick. Aplastic anemia. It appears she contacted him for a bone marrow transplant, Peterson reported. Charity, Alistair sneered. So she's playing the pity card. Pathetic, but effective. He paused, his mind working, plotting. We need to re-establish control. Go to Havenwood. Don't approach my son. Approach her. Make her an offer. One she cannot refuse this time. Money. Medical care for the boy from the best doctors in the world. A new life anywhere she wants. The condition is simple: she disappears again permanently. And she signs a legally binding document relinquishing all parental rights of the boy to the Brown family and an NDA that would bankrupt her great-grandchildren if she ever breathes a word of this. And if she refuses, sir? Peterson asked. Alistair's silence was the answer. Peterson understood. Back in Havenwood, a fragile truce had settled over the house. David had arranged for the medical team to arrive the next morning to perform the blood tests for the transplant match in the comfort of their home, to minimize the disruption for Leo. He had been careful, respectful, keeping a polite distance. He spent the evening watching Avery and Leo. He saw the easy affection between them, the inside jokes, the way her face softened when she looked at her son. He was an intruder in their perfect self-contained world. The pain of the 8 years he had missed was a physical ache in his chest. The next day, as the medical team packed up their equipment after taking samples from both him and Avery, a sleek black sedan, even more imposing than the one David had arrived in, pulled up across the street from the bakery. Avery noticed it from the kitchen window. "More of your fan club?" she asked, her tone dry. David looked. His blood went cold. He didn't recognize the car, but he recognized the type. It was the kind of vehicle his father used for unofficial business. "Stay here," he said, his voice tight. He walked outside, his posture shifting from tentative guest to the formidable CEO. A man in a tailored, unassuming suit got out of the car. Peterson. A man David hadn't seen in years. A man he associated with his father's dirtiest work. "Peterson," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing here?" "Mr. Brown," Peterson said, his face impassive. "I have a message for Ms. Hayes from your father." "You will not go near her," David bit out. "Any message for her goes through me." "My instructions were clear," Peterson said calmly, though his eyes flickered with unease. He was loyal to Alistair, but he was not stupid. David was the future of the Empire, and he was currently radiating pure menace. "And my instructions are clearer," David countered, stepping closer, his height and presence overwhelming. "Get back in that car, drive back to New York, and tell my father that if he ever sends anyone near my family again, the only thing he'll have left of Brown Global is the letterhead. Is that understood?" The threat was audacious. To threaten to dismantle the family empire was to threaten Alistair Brown's very soul. Peterson's professional mask cracked for a fraction of a second. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Understood, Mr. Brown." He got back in the car, and it pulled away as silently as it had arrived. David stood on the sidewalk, his fists clenched. The confrontation had been short, but it was a declaration of war. His father knew, and he was already making his move. He went back inside to find Avery standing by the door, her face pale. She had heard everything. "Your father sent him, didn't he?" she asked softly. David nodded, his jaw tight with fury. "He sent him to buy you off, to make you disappear again." Avery wrapped her arms around herself, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "He thinks he can just erase us." "He won't," David vowed, looking at her, a fierce protectiveness surging through him. "Avery, I let him take you from me once. I was young and he manipulated me. It will not happen again. This time I fight." In that moment, the fragile truce between them solidified into an alliance. They were no longer just two broken people connected by a sick child. They were partners united against the powerful, ruthless man who had tried to destroy their lives. The battle for their son's life was now entwined with a battle against the Brown patriarch himself. The call came the following afternoon. David's phone buzzed with the number of the lead doctor from Mount Sinai. He answered on the first ring, Avery watching him from across the living room, her hands clenched in her lap. "Mr. Brown," the doctor's voice was calm and professional, "we have the results of the HLA typing. You are a perfect match for Leo." A wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees washed over David. He closed his eyes, pressing the phone to his ear. "A perfect match." He repeated, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Avery, and for the first time a genuine, unburdened smile touched his lips. "He's a match, Avery. It's a perfect match." Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed streamed down Avery's face. It wasn't a solution to all their problems, but it was the most important one. It was hope. The surgery could be scheduled. Leo had a real chance. With the immediate medical crisis averted, the suffocating weight of their past rushed back in to fill the space. That night, after a celebratory and cautiously optimistic pizza dinner with a blissfully unaware Leo, the two of them sat down again at the kitchen table. The lacquered box with David's old business card still sat on the counter, a relic of a story whose beginning they both knew but whose middle was a twisted knot of deception. "You have to tell me everything," Avery said, her voice quiet but firm. "No more secrets, David. I need to understand what happened. I need to know why I spent 8 years believing I was nothing to you." And so he told her. He started with the park bench, the ring in his pocket, the plan to propose. He described his father's sudden appearance, the chilling conversation, the surveillance photos that made his blood run cold. He told her about the threat, the cold, calculated words Alistair had used to describe her. "He told me you'd taken money," David said, his voice laced with the shame of having believed it even for a moment. "He said you were a gold digger and that he'd bought your silence. When I found your apartment empty, I thought he was right." Avery listened, her expression a canvas of shock, hurt, and dawning anger. "And you believed him? You thought I would sell a future with you for money?" "I was 25, Avery," he said, his voice raw. "He was my father. He had never lied to me like that before. He painted a picture of you running, and all the evidence he presented supported it. It broke me." He didn't tell her about the faked death report yet. It felt like a cruelty too far for one night. Then it was her turn. She told him about the agonizing 2 weeks of silence after he disappeared. The unanswered calls to the apartment he'd been renting under a less conspicuous name. The gut-wrenching moment she realized he was truly gone. "I thought I had done something wrong," she whispered, the old insecurity bubbling to the surface. "I thought maybe you found out who your family was and you were ashamed of me. The poor art student. I packed my bags and ran. I had to. Staying in the city felt like drowning." They pieced together the timeline, the lies slotting into place like shards of glass. His father had exploited her panicked flight, using it as proof for his narrative. He had played them both, using their love and their insecurities against them. "This whole time," Avery said, her voice trembling with rage, "I've been raising our son thinking his father was a heartless coward who abandoned us. And you've been mourning a woman you thought betrayed you for cash." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "He didn't just separate us, David. He poisoned our memories of each other." That was the deepest cruelty. The theft of not just their future, but their past as well. David knew he needed more than just his word. He needed irrefutable proof of his father's machinations. He pulled out his phone and made a call to Garrett Vance, who had been quietly digging in the background since David's departure from New York. "Garrett, I need everything you have on my father's activities 8 years ago," David said, putting the phone on speaker. "Specifically, any interaction with a man named Peterson and any record of a payoff to Avery Hayes. Or Ross, her maiden name." "Already ahead of you, boss." Garrett's voice came through crisp and efficient. "I went through the off-the-books ledgers Alistair keeps with his private wealth manager. There are payments to a landlord in Brooklyn, payments to a private investigator for 6 months of surveillance, but there's no record of any large sum ever being paid to an Avery Ross or Hayes. The payoff was a fabrication. Avery gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It was one thing to hear it from David. It was another to have it confirmed by an outside source. But there's more, Garrett continued, his tone grim. I accessed some of Alistair's sealed personal files. It seems about a year after you thought she left, he grew concerned you might one day try to find her. So he took an extra step. He had a file created detailing her accidental death in a car crash in rural Pennsylvania. The kitchen fell silent. Avery stared at David, her eyes wide with horror. David's face was a mask of stone, but his eyes burned with a fire hot enough to melt steel. He told you I was dead, Avery whispered, horrified. David couldn't speak. He just nodded, the shame and rage warring within him. He had not just mourned their breakup, he had mourned her. He had spent 7 years believing the love of his life was buried in some anonymous grave. The full, monstrous scope of Alistair's deception was finally laid bare. He hadn't just tried to separate them. He had tried to obliterate Avery from existence, to salt the earth of David's love for her so that nothing could ever grow there again. Avery stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the dark, quiet street of the town that had been her refuge. For 8 years she had built her life on the belief that she was a survivor of a great heartbreak. Now she realized she was a victim of a great crime. She turned back to David, her expression hardened with a new diamond-sharp resolve. The fear she'd felt when Peterson's car appeared was gone, replaced by a cold fury that mirrored his own. "He won't get away with this," she said, her voice low and steady. "He's not just dealing with you anymore, David. He's dealing with Leo's mother. He tried to take my life from me. I will not let him touch my sons." In the shared crucible of their uncovered past, their alliance was forged into a weapon. The fight for Leo's health was now inextricably linked to a fight for justice, and they would face Alistair Brown together. The bone marrow transplant was scheduled at Mount Sinai in New York City. David, using his considerable resources, arranged for a private medical transport for Leo and for Avery and her friend Bianca to stay in a suite at a hotel near the hospital. He wanted them to have every comfort, every advantage, but it also meant returning to the city that was the heart of his father's kingdom. It was a necessary move into the lion's den. Alistair Brown was waiting. He didn't summon David to the office. Instead, he came to the hospital the day before the surgery. He moved through the hushed, sterile corridors of the exclusive private wing like a monarch surveying his territory, his presence sucking the warmth from the air. He found David standing outside Leo's room, watching through the glass as Avery read a story to their son. "A touching domestic scene," Alistair said, his voice dripping with condescension. David turned, his body language instantly shifting into a defensive, rigid posture. "You are not welcome here," David said, his voice a low growl. "This hospital wing exists because of a check I wrote," Alistair countered coolly. "I am welcome wherever my money is. I came to see the boy. You will stay away from him. You will stay away from her." Alistair gave a thin, dismissive smile. "You are being foolish, David. Sentimental. This woman and her child are a complication, a loose end from a past you should have forgotten. I tried to handle it cleanly, but you insisted on this reunion. You call this clean?" David shot back, his voice rising. "You lied to me for 8 years. You let me believe the woman I loved was a common thief. You let me believe she was dead. You stole my son from me. I protected you." Alistair's voice cracked like a whip, his icy composure finally breaking. "I protected our name, our legacy from a nobody. I gave you the freedom to become who you are. Do you think you could have built this empire with her and a child dragging you down? I did what was necessary." "What was necessary? You destroyed lives, Father." "I built an empire," Alistair roared, his voice echoing slightly in the corridor. A nurse looked out from her station, then quickly looked away. "And now you're willing to risk it all for them." "I spoke to the Beaumonts. Genevieve is humiliated. This alliance worth billions is crumbling because you decided to play house with a baker." Avery, having heard the raised voices, had quietly opened the door to Leo's room, stepping out and closing it gently behind her. She stood beside David, her hand finding his, their fingers lacing together. It was an unconscious, simple gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. Alistair's eyes flickered to their joined hands and his face contorted in disgust. He turned his attention to Avery. "You," he said, the word laden with contempt. "You should have taken the offer. I'm prepared to make it again, substantially larger this time. Name your price. Take the boy and go. Live a life of luxury anywhere in the world. Just get out of my son's life." Avery met his gaze without flinching. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was filled with a strength that Alistair's money could not buy. "There is no price for my son, Mr. Brown. There is no price for the 8 years you stole from us. You see us as a complication, but you have it backward. You are the complication in our lives, and you are no longer welcome." The sheer audacity of her defiance left Alistair momentarily speechless. He turned back to David. "You see, she has made you weak. If you continue down this path, if you choose them over this family, over your birthright, consider yourself cut off. You will be stripped of your position as CEO. You will be written out of my will. You will have nothing." It was his final, most powerful weapon, the threat of utter disinheritance. For a moment, David looked at his father, the architect of his success and his misery. He thought of the 95th floor office, the power, the name. And then he looked at Avery, her jaw set, her eyes fierce. He looked at the door to his son's room, the son who was fighting for his life, the son who had his eyes. The choice was not a choice at all. "I already have everything I need," David said, his voice clear and steady. He squeezed Avery's hand. "And it's here. As for Brown Global, you can keep it. I'm done." He turned his back on his stunned father and walked with Avery back into Leo's room, closing the door on Alistair and the cold, empty empire he represented. The next morning, the transplant procedure began. It was a long, agonizing day for Avery and David. They sat in the waiting room, a space that felt suspended in time, fueled by bad coffee and shared anxiety. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They were bound together by the fragile life of the boy in the operating room. Late in the afternoon, the surgeon, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Eris, came out. She pulled off her surgical cap, a tired but genuine smile on her face. "It went very well," she said. "The procedure was a success. Leo is in recovery. The next few weeks are critical, but his body has accepted the transplant. He has a very good chance at a full recovery." Avery collapsed into David's arms, sobbing with relief. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, the tension of the last several weeks finally breaking. They had won the most important battle. Their son was going to be okay. That evening, David made 2 calls. The first was to Genevieve Beaumont. He ended their engagement with quiet dignity and sincere apologies for the public nature of their breakup. To his surprise, she was not angry, merely resigned. "I always knew a part of you was somewhere else, David," she had said. "Go be happy." The second call was to Garrett Vance. "Garrett," David said, watching Leo sleep peacefully in his hospital bed, Avery asleep in a chair beside him. "My father is about to make a move to oust me from the company. I want you to preempt him. Call an emergency board meeting. Use the proof you found, the misappropriation of funds for his surveillance, the fraud. Expose him. I'm nominating you to act as interim CEO. The company is yours to run." It was an abdication, a revolution. He was burning the final bridge to his old life, and he had never felt so free. 6 months later, the sterile scent of the hospital was a fading memory, replaced once again by the warm, life-affirming aroma of baking bread in Havenwood. The autumn leaves were turning, painting the trees in fiery shades of red and gold, the same colors as Avery's hair. Leo, though still needing regular checkups, was a different boy. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his energy was boundless. He was currently chasing a soccer ball across the small backyard, his laughter echoing in the crisp air. The aplastic anemia was in remission. The transplant had been a complete success. Inside the bakery's kitchen, Avery was teaching David how to properly knead sourdough. His sleeves were rolled up, his forearms dusted with flour. The black cashmere sweater had been replaced by a simple gray t-shirt. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment he had never known. "You're punishing the dough, David." Avery teased, her hands guiding his. "It needs finesse, not a hostile takeover." He chuckled, a real easy laugh. "My father always said to crush the competition." "Well, this is bread," she said, smiling. "It responds better to love." The aftermath of their stand against Alistair had been seismic. Garrett Vance, armed with David's blessing and irrefutable proof of Alistair's corporate malfeasance and personal vendetta, had successfully taken control of Brown Global. Alistair, disgraced and exposed, had been forced into retirement. The empire he had worshipped above all else had been taken from him not by a competitor, but by the consequences of his own cruelty. He was a king in a self-imposed exile, rattling around his mahogany study, a man with billions of dollars and nothing of value. David had walked away from it all without a backward glance. He had kept a significant but non-controlling share of the company's stock, ensuring his family would never want for anything, but he had severed all ties to the corporate world. The fortune was a tool now, not a definition. He used it to set up a foundation for pediatric blood disorders and to invest in Havenwood's small businesses, including a major no-strings-attached expansion of the rolling pin. Their life was not a fairy tale. There were scars. The 8 years they had lost were a phantom presence they were learning to live with. Leo had questions, and they answered them with age-appropriate honesty. Avery still had moments of mistrust, and David still wrestled with the ghost of the man he had been. Rebuilding a family was harder than rebuilding an empire. It required patience, forgiveness, and a daily choice to love. Leo ran inside, his face flushed. "Dad, can you come see my new trick?" he yelled, already calling David Dad, as if he'd been saying it his whole life. David's face lit up. He wiped his floury hands on his jeans. "You bet, champ." He leaned down and gave Avery a soft, lingering kiss. It was a kiss that tasted of flour, sugar, and a future they were building together, one day at a time. As he went outside, Avery watched him from the kitchen window. She saw not the billionaire CEO, the ghost from a painful past, but a man. A father. Her partner. He was chasing their son across the lawn, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. The snow globe of her life had not just been shaken. It had been shattered. But what they were building in its place was stronger, truer, and infinitely more beautiful. It was real. We've just witnessed a story not just about lost love, but about a stolen life. A story of how the deepest betrayals can come from those closest to us, and how the fiercest love can rise from the ashes. Avery and David's journey reminds us that true wealth isn't found in penthouse views or billion-dollar portfolios, but in the unbreakable bonds of family and the courage to fight for them. It shows that even after 8 years of lies and darkness, the truth can find its way to the light, and a shattered family can be made whole again. What would you have done in Avery's position? Would you have had the strength to make that call? We all face moments where our pride wars with our needs. If this story of resilience, love, and justice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with real heart. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more gripping dramas that explore the depths of the human experience. What story should we tell next? Let us know in the comments below.